I'm Jackie Doucette, and I'm on a mission to discover exactly what life is like beyond retirement. Join me while I chat with people who've already done it, who've retired to something rather than from something. Let's find out together exactly what's waiting for us when we say goodbye to that 9 to 5. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Retirement. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Jill Phillips. She grew up in the early 60s in a London that no longer exists. She started life in Lamlash Street. She went to school, she grew up, and after a few years of working in a solicitor's office in London, she decided to emigrate to Canada. She spent 30 years working here as an occupational therapist and a hospital manager. And then towards the end of her career, when other people generally start slowing down, she decided to speed things up a little bit. She's been battling against an insecure mindset and some self-sabotage, things that we all deal with. And those things became a pathway to new confidence in her 60s. She divorced, she moved, she finished writing her master's thesis in occupational therapy. And now, as a published author and a speaker, she started checking things off her bucket list, and she's helping other people do the same thing. Thanks for joining me today, Jill.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So let's start with a little insight into you. You grew up in post-war London in a neighborhood and a house that were basically condemned from the description in your story. And obviously, as it was happening, you wouldn't realize that you were learning something, but they say hindsight's 20/20. So can you tell us some of the lessons you learned from your early life?
Well, what was interesting about writing the book, and not that I set out to write the book, but just really reflecting on those days, is I understood better what I did learn from those days. Because as you said, you just go through life, you're a child, you just do what you're told and carry on, and everything is just normal. So what I learned looking back on that time is how much of an impact my mother had had on me. My mum was always slightly different from anyone else in the family, in as much as very working class background. So as soon as the kids got to be 15 years of age, you get them out to work, you want money on the table so you can buy food, very concrete focus. And she said, no, she said, my children are not going to leave school at 15. They are going to go on as high as they can in terms of their education. And I know when I can remember, when I got to be 14 or 15, I can remember my nan coming round, my dad's mother, and say, it's about time Jill went and worked at Boots or whatever the name, like it couldn't have a Walmart type job, right? Nothing wrong with Walmart, but it's an entry level position. And she said, no, she's not going to do that. And so because mum was different, I've actually grown up different as well. So mum was, she broke the mold and created her own mold as she went along. She didn't see it that way. It was interesting when I was talking to her later on, when I written the book and showed it to her, and said, Mum, that was an amazing thing to do. You didn't follow what all the brothers and sisters were telling you should do, and you just went on off on your own tangent, basically. And she said, oh no, she said, I just did it because that was the best way to do it, sort of thing. So even then, she didn't see it as breaking the mold or doing anything amazing. But because she emphasized education, I did occupational therapy, as you just mentioned, then I did my master's degree. And then because I'd done that later on in life, when I was thinking of the family stories, and I said to myself, oh, I'd like to write a book. I thought, part of me was saying, no, you're never, ever going to write a book. Like, who do you think you are? You're not going to be a published author. That's just silly, right? But then the other side of me, because of my mum's encouragement in education, was saying, well, you've written a thesis. I mean, nobody ever bought the thing, but that wasn't why you wrote it in the first place. But you can actually write that many words on a page. You can actually write the volume. And then the next question was, can I actually write something that people would actually want to read in quality, basically? But I think it all started, as I said earlier, with mum saying, oh, I'm going to do this because it makes sense, not because the family's telling me to do things.
And that's a big thing. I think a lot of people fight against that all their lives. I'm going to do what I think, because there's a big stigma against not following the path that everyone else is following. Do you think your mother thought about that or worried about that at all?
I She said she didn't, but when you look at the dynamics of the time, so 1960s, very male-dominated society, men were the breadwinners. If women went out to work and they had children at home, it was almost like you were neglecting the children. If you saw a man on the street pushing a stroller and with a baby in it, then it's like, there's something wrong with that family. That man shouldn't be doing that. You know, men don't do those sorts of things. So very, very gender stereotypes, very, very strong. So there was my mum, a woman who was supposed to do what the man said. Now, fortunately, she married my dad, who was a very quiet man. So there was no issues there at all. She sort of ruled the roost. But her brother, she had 12 brothers and sisters. And they were all the brothers were like 6 foot tall, very imposing people. And her father was a regimental sergeant major, drill sergeant. So very, very strict male, strong male roles in the family. And I can remember when we eventually left Lamlash Street, and Mum has decided at that point that she wanted to buy a house and not rent, because she said it's a waste of money paying somebody rent, and as opposed to if you bought a house, eventually it would become yours and then you'd have some wealth behind you. Well, the whole family, all including all the brothers, said, you should never do that, Ivy. It's a terrible idea. You're going to have this millstone around your neck for decades and decades to come, of paying this mortgage and the stress of paying the mortgage. And she basically ignored them all and said, no, I'm doing this. She said, she's only like 5'2", and she didn't go around sort of, saying to people, I'm going to do this. She just said, no, this is what I'm going to do. And and yes, we're moving here, and this is the house we're buying. It was very matter of fact, but it was tremendous. I mean, no other woman in the whole family would do that. Nobody.
Wow. That's quite a role model for you.
Well, it is. It's funny because I was, for Mum, basically the last year of Mum's life, Mum passed away in January last year. For the last 12 months, for 6 months I was living with her, and then I moved out to get a little bit more personal space. But I said to her about that, don't you think that it was, very different for you to do that sort of thing? And she said, no, she said, she always said to me, she said, my children were more important to me than the family. So what in her mind, I think what she was doing was she was giving us a future. And that's exactly what she did. Because, I'm actually sitting in the house that she left to myself, my brother right now. And the house has wealth attached to it because it's just outside London, obviously. But the other thing that happened is she sort of changed other people within the family. So my cousin Joan, who's about 4 years older than me, when she got married, in that, her mum always said, well, just go and rent a place, go to the council, go to the supportive housing place, and just, they'll give you some a half decent place to live in. And if you have kids, then they'll give you another decent place to live in. But it was paying rent all the time. Whereas, no, she didn't do that. Joan, my cousin, then went and bought her house. And then about 10 years later, I didn't know this until quite recently, my other cousin, who had rented a house and lived with his mother for years and years and years, decided there was a right to buy. Basically, you could take a council house, a house that was supportive housing, and you could buy it at a fairly cheap price. He decided he was going to do that. Nobody else in the family did, but he did. And that was my mum's influence again. So mum influenced myself. I've never rented, always bought, had property that I had a mortgage on or whatever. My brother did the same. My 2 cousins did the same, and their children did the same. So because mum changed in the norms for the family in the 1960s, that side of the family, our side of the family, has done quite well. The other side of the family who said, no, keep renting. Most of them are just still renting properties now. And being in the UK, there's, houses are fairly expensive here. So, and that was just one simple example of how she changed the family. And that's why I was really pleased that I wrote the book, because other generations could see that, and hopefully other people as well outside the family. I wasn't expecting other people to buy the book, but just to have that documented, really, so people would know it. That wasn't lost, that story.
Oh, I think it's a great story. I read it all, and I was feeling like I was right there with you, watching all those things happening, and I was dying at the end to know what happened to Anthony. I don't want you to tell me, because someone else might read it and that might mess things up a little bit.
But I have to just, I won't tell you what happened to Anthony, but you're not the first person to ask me that. So being a first time author, you're not quite sure how, if what you've written people are going to enjoy. And I was walking down just outside the house here. I was walking down the road one day and I heard this voice behind me. It was one of the neighbors saying, "What happened to Anthony?" And I thought, what? Because I was just thinking of something completely different. And then they said to me that they'd enjoyed the story and they wanted to know what happened to Anthony. And that for me as an author was significant, because it's like, wow, people really enjoyed the book and they're really interested in the characters, the people that I wrote about. And that's a completely new experience. And it was a really good one, actually. Really enjoyed that.
I thought it was very good. I had to keep reminding myself that I had to put it down and go back to work for a while.
That's very nice of you. Thank you. Nice of you to say so.
One thing that I think you can probably give me and the listeners some pointers on is how to motivate yourself to pursue major life goals after you've retired. Can you share a little bit about how you managed to do that for yourself and what tips you might have for other people?
I think there has to be an emotional connection. Has to be. You can sit and say, well, I should be doing this and I should be doing that. But unless there's an emotional need, if it's not in here, in your heart, then it doesn't happen. And I think some of the things that I've done over the last 10 years have come from, I just had to do it. There was no choice. The book, for example, why did I think I even wanted to write a book? Well, because a couple of months before I started writing it, my uncle had said he had some war stories and he wanted to turn his war stories into a book. And he'd written so many, it had like 3 or 4 outlines in his little book there. And I thought, oh, that's nice, if you can do that. And sadly, he passed away 3 months later. And I came back over for the funeral from Canada. And we were clearing through his flat to see what things needed to be removed because it had to be sold. And I came across a little booklet of his, and it was an outline of the stories that he'd been talking about. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I could somehow grant Uncle's wish? Because I lived with Uncle and Auntie were in the book, and they lived downstairs, so very, very close emotionally, almost like a second mum and dad to me. So I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I could do that? And then after the flat was sold, I had some finances. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to do this. So I had to finish the book for me because I wanted Uncle's stories to get out there. And then when I had a book coach who helped me with the structure of the book, and so why don't you combine Lamlash Street and Uncle's stories, which is what happened in the end. So it became a sense of, I need to do this for Uncle. I need to do it as well because Mum was getting older. Dad had Alzheimer's. He died only 2.5 years ago now. Mum was the youngest in the family. So all the other older brothers and sisters had already gone. So I knew if I didn't get this down now in writing, those stories would be completely lost. So again, it was an emotional thing. You don't sit there say, I'm going to make a small fortune out of selling books, because you don't. I can tell you that. You do it because you want your story to get out there. So there has to be an emotional thing. The other thing I did in the past 10 years is I managed to lose a lot of weight. I lost 40 pounds basically, which is a fair bit of weight. And especially when people are saying at your age and all this sort of thing, you're in your 60s, all the hormones and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, what happened though was I slipped and fell on New Year's Eve. Oh, no. And it was on ice and snow. And I broke my arm in 2 places. And I also had such a bad sprain on my left ankle. I couldn't walk on it for about 2 months. I was in a walking boot thing. And of course, that's a lot of time to sit and think about, I'm out of condition. And of course, my medical background as well. And I decided at that point, I had to do something about that. So my motivation was emotional. I recognized that when you get in your 60s, you can do 2 things with your body. You can either say, well, at my age, what do you expect? And I'll just sit here on the sofa. Or you can go to the gym, you can swim, you can get your personal trainer, you can lose weight. You can decide what you want to do. You have a turn left, turn right type choice in life. And as I'd spent 2 months waiting, for everything to heal, and it was a lot of pain and discomfort as well, couldn't sleep at night, or that sort of thing. Again, that was my emotional support to get me through, another 18 months of, watching your what you eat and exercise. And I still exercise now. And because I did that 2.5 years ago, I started running 5Ks. I'm not a runner. Even at school, it used to be horrendous, the idea of running around the running track. So I ran 5Ks for about 6 or 8 months. Then COVID hit, and I haven't quite got back to that yet. Now I'm doing the golf thing. But I think you have to have that emotional drive. You've got to find your real reason for it. It can't be logic. It doesn't work. It has to be something in your heart that no matter what, you've got to do this.
So it can't just be discipline that comes along that gets you there. It's got to be something much deeper than just the habit of doing something.
Well, for me, it has to be, because there are times with me, and I think most people tend to sort of fall off the wagon a bit with whatever your focus is in life. And so then you're sitting there thinking, oh, I should really do that. And you either say, well, I think I'm just going to forget about that now. Or you say, you know what, I'm just going to do this for Uncle. Or do you want to fall again and have that, and break your arm again? And so you have to have, for me, that's the emotion that pulls you back on track. And then you have to have in place all of the logical stuff, the encouragement, and, if you want to lose weight, don't have tons of chocolate in the house, that sort of sensible stuff. But no, it has to come from the heart, I think, because that's the driver, I think, for the whole thing.
So I guess you probably don't have anything to compare this to, but what was it like for you becoming an author at the point in your life when you did, as opposed to, thinking about it growing up and trying to be an author? You just kind of decided later on, hey, I'm going to do this.
I think what had happened was there have been so many things that happened. First of all, okay, so I said I did actually write the thesis. That was the very first grain of, I didn't think I could do this, and I could do it. And then, like I said, I was in an unhappy marriage, and so I divorced in my my mid-60s, basically, by the time divorce went through. And other people are saying, oh, what are you doing? You should stay where you are, and all this sort of thing. And then the other thing that happened at the same time, I got a diagnosis of cancer, which now I'm good now, but so when you sit there and the doctor's saying to you, yes, it was positive, the cancer, you're thinking, oh my goodness. And of course, I just separated at the time, but then friends came along and they helped me with that. And I think what happened was so many things happened to me over a very short period of time that I didn't think I'd survive. That by the time it came to the idea of the book, it's like, well, you know what, I may as well just try this and see, because what am I waiting for? And I didn't, and like you said, I wasn't somebody who said her whole life, I have to be a published author. It never occurred to me. I just wanted to get the stories down on paper. And then, as I said, I had some financial means to have a book writing coach, and then I had an editor, and somebody helped me with the front cover of the book and that page and that sort of thing, the graphic design person. So I think it was just one thing built on another and another and another. I think sometimes if you say I'm going to be a published author, you think, oh, well, I'm never going to do that. But if you just look at the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, and the next thing, you'll find and I've read this tons of times, but it is true, as you go through life, when you need somebody to help you, they suddenly come from nowhere. What I found is complete strangers can be incredibly helpful. And if you say enough times you need something, somebody eventually will come to you and say, oh, do you need a hand with that? And I'll give you a hand up with it. And it's happened time and again. So I think I see life differently now. I know that whatever I do, there's always somebody who's going to help me through it.
I think that's true. I think I've heard that from a lot of people, and I've experienced it myself. If you put it out there, say what it is you're looking for, so that the universe knows, somewhere along the way, someone is going to come along with exactly what you need.
It is. And I always thought it was going to be sort of maybe close friends and family first would help you with those sorts of things, but they're the last people to do it, to be honest.
Exactly.
I mean, even after I'd written the book and it was published, and even after I'd given them a copy at Christmas, which is all they got last year for Christmas gifts, they didn't say, oh, that was amazing. It's like, oh yeah, I read the book, yeah, it was quite good, that's about it. So it's like, okay, fine. And I spoke to other people and they'd had exactly the same experience. So no, it's often people that you don't expect to say anything. They're very complimentary, very helpful, to be honest.
I think that's a fairly common experience, I think, for people in any sort of success that they have. The people closest to them aren't really the ones that help them at all. They're the ones that are trying to not necessarily hold them back, but keep them safe, I think. And I think it's really important for everybody to get past that so that they can just step out and say, you know, I can be safe and be bigger.
Yes. And that's the other thing. People have little pictures in their heads as to how they see you and what your role in life is. Yeah. And if you don't fulfill that role, they get very upset. They see you a certain way. And I can remember the first time my sister-in-law said, oh, I can't do whatever it was because I'm busy that day. Oh, so what are you doing? Oh, I'm taking part in a conference. Yeah, it's in Houston, Texas. It's to do with being a writer. And the look on her face was, really? What? I said, well, yeah, I've been doing this for a while, you know. But so, you know, they don't see you that way. They just don't see it, right?
Yeah, that's it. So one of the things in your little bio that I didn't read, or the little info sheet that I got about you, indicates that you think that being an author has taught you something that's important about our stories and just our life in general, and how important it is for us to get that story out. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, basically what I learned, and I learned a lot writing this book, is that our forebears, our ancestors, our mums and dads and our grandparents, contribute towards our life, and we in turn contribute towards our children's lives, and it goes on and on. So none of us, or very few of us, for me, for example, work in isolation. We're all building on the attitudes and the beliefs of our forebears. And it's interesting because so when I did research, obviously when I was doing my master's, so there they talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. So you go to read these articles about these experts in whatever topic it is, and they're the giants, and you're standing on their shoulders like this little person, and you're going to build on that, and it's going to, and you're going to go from that point onwards. And I thought about that, and that's really what we do in life. None of us, not in my situation, grow up in isolation. We all have all these influences from the people that raise us. And when I looked back on it through writing the book, it's like, you know what? I didn't really understand why I'd done the things I'd done in life, and I ignored other people's views, about, oh, no, you can't do this because. And then I realized that's what my mum had done. And when I was like a child, so she was schooling me in that way of thinking, and I didn't realize it until I looked back. So very much we are products of how we're raised. We are products of the environment we're raised in. We can go on to do all sorts of weird and wonderful things afterwards. But at the end of the day, when it comes right back to it, we are still going to follow the basic beliefs of how we were raised. Hopefully there were the good and positive ones. And not all mine were positive. I mean, parents were quite critical in some points, so, and they can be, but you still are a product of that, and you maybe learn, you deal with it, and you read about things so you can be more positive. But end of the day, that's still your baseline, your core. That's where you've started from.
So then writing that down, even if it doesn't get published, writing that down gives you the hindsight, I guess, that you might not have otherwise.
Yeah, because I was quite angry. I can remember at the time when we moved from London out to here, and as a child, I had, of course, people didn't even talk to children in those days because children were seen and not heard, right? So, but I was really angry. And I think for decades, I thought, no, I don't understand why mum and dad did that. That wasn't fair, It didn't change my life, but it was sort of like at the back of my head all the time. And then so I was talking to her about, I was doing research for the book and stuff, and eventually wrote it all down. And I thought, you know what, I actually understand why they did what they did. I'm not sure I would have done the same thing, but all the anger just disappeared because I think they stopped being mum and dad. They started being people, young people who were raised in a family, and mum really on her own because dad, as I said, just followed what mum said. So it was really mum was the captain of the ship and there was nobody to challenge her, sort of thing. So she was doing it all on her own. Remember, no internet. She wasn't highly educated. Her family were telling her something completely different. So so it gave me a real admiration for her, I think, in a sense, and certainly a good understanding of why she did it. And because of what she did, it was a tough thing to do. We're in a good position now in life.
Well, it definitely was good reading. Your book's called Lamlash Street, A Portrait of 1960s Post-War London Through One Family's Story. And that story, I don't know how to say it, that story made an impact on me, even now when, I'm about to be 60, just because it made me go back and think a little bit more about my family and about the things that had happened. And I guess that, possibly that's part of what you were doing is, getting people to think about their own lives and think about, what's going on in them and how they can make a difference. And I'm not sure where I was going with that, but I
hear what you're saying though. No, I hear what you're saying. What you're saying is every family has a relevant story, and I think they do.
Yes.
And when I was writing mine, I was sitting there thinking, why on earth would people want to read about me going swimming and what happened in the swimming baths and the fact that the swimming instructor never got her feet wet at all? She just had a broom handle to encourage us to keep swimming.
I love that story.
So, but why would anyone be interested in that stuff other than it's a bit of a curiosity? So for me, like I said, when I got the thing published, I was thinking, well, if I sell 2 copies, I'll be thrilled to death. And certainly they'd all be family members because none of them bought them. I had to give them copies. But you know what? I don't think we see the relevance. I don't think we understand how interesting our families are. And what I'd love to see is it'd be lovely if in every family, the next generation, somebody in every generation wrote like an update to the book. That would be superb. So you had like this history of the book, of the family and what they'd done and where they came from. And that way you could capture so much of the essence of what I was exposed to when I was young. And then hopefully that would change, keep moving forward with that influence. So
and you'd see so many differences. So as time goes on, and each family, you'd see the same things getting passed on, the values, that sort of thing, but you'd see the way that they're different in the next generation and the way that life changes what you're doing. I think that would be really interesting. Yeah. So because my daughter, that was the other thing, right? I gave birth to a son, but my son is transgender, so is now my daughter, which was a tough thing to go through. But we get on great, we get on really well. But she says to me, because she writes, and she said, Mum, I think you should do a little update in a few years' time as to what you've been up to, sort of thing. I think every family has these amazing stories, and we don't understand how we can contribute to other people's lives unless we share those stories. That's it. Well, thank you very much for spending some time with me and sharing your story and your background and how it's changed you. I think the fact that you've done so many things later in your life is a boon to the listeners, to the people who are sitting there saying, I can't do anything. What is there left to do? If you do nothing else, you could write your story. And I think that would be a wonderful gift to generations to come.
Yes, it would be. It'd be fantastic. And you learn so much about yourself and other people while you're doing it. It's an interesting journey. Yeah.
Thank you very much for being with us today. If people want to talk to you about writing or talk to you about anything else, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, they can go to my website. It's www.jmphillips, which is PHILLIPS, author.com. And if you do a search for Lamlash Street, you'll come across it as well. Lamlash, by the way, is LAMLASH.
I'll make sure that goes in the show notes with the link so that people can find it.
That's great. Thank you so much.
And that's it for this episode of Beyond Retirement. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed it. Are you ready to start rocking your retirement? head on over to www.beyondretirement.ca/rocking it and sign up to plan out your own roadmap for retirement. Don't wait till it's too late.